Well, good evening, everyone. Shall we make a start? Welcome to the official launch of Pro Bono Week 2022 in the UK. As you probably know, this is an opportunity to showcase and discuss pro bono. That is when lawyers volunteer their time free of charge to help those in need. Pro Bono Week is organised in a collaborative way by an organising committee which I chair. My name is Toby Brown, as you probably gathered, not Gray's Inn, but I'm very grateful to Gray's Inn for offering to provide their webinar functionality on Zoom. And I have not managed to change my name. You'd think after 2 years of Zoom, I would have worked it out by now. But the Pro Bono Week committee has a really wide range of representatives from across the sector: pro bono charities, law schools, law firms, the in-house pro bono group, the collaborative plan, the law societies and bar councils from across the UK. Can I take this moment to express my thanks to them for their support in organising Pro Bono Week, but also thank our project leads this year, Mary Dobson-Smith and Laura Cassidy. But really, Pro Bono Week is a sum of its parts. It's all of the many other organisations across the UK that organise events such as these to reach out to their volunteers, to discuss pro bono with potential new volunteers, to talk about the challenges facing the sector. We have over 60 events taking place this year and lots of social media discussions too. And the themes are an array of topics facing the pro bono sector. And you can find out more about Pro Bono Week as a whole if you visit our website, probonoweek.org.uk. And also, if you want to tweet about tonight or whichever is your preferred social media outlet, the hashtags are WeDoProBono and Pro Bono Week. But that's just the introduction, the warm-up. For tonight's official launch, we decided to focus on the challenges facing us and the public by the cost of living crisis. We're going to hear about the need that frontline advice agencies are seeing, the demand that the public have for charities, but we're also going to hear about how the profession, how the legal profession can step up and respond to this crisis. And so I'm delighted to welcome our speakers tonight. First of all, and she has just been delayed, will be with us shortly, is the Attorney General, the Right Honourable Victoria Prentis MP. James Sandbach, the Development Manager at London Citizens Advice. Joanna Elson, CBE, Chief Executive of Money Advice Trust. Yasmin Waljee, OBE, International Pro Bono Manager, Pro Bono Partner even, at Hogan Lovells. And finally, our surprise guest speaker, I'm delighted to welcome John Mahoney, Lead Solicitor at the Cost of Living Clinic at the Westway Trust and St. Luke's Community Trust. And then we'll have a brief Q&A at the end. You'll have seen that the usual way with the webinar, there is a chat function, a text function you can use. And so please do send your questions during the course of the next hour. So with that introduction, can I introduce James Sandbach, who is going to give us a presentation of some of the data seen at a national level by Citizens Advice. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Toby. I'll share my screen if that's, I hope this works. It was a minute ago, so it should be okay. Right, can everyone see the screen? Okay. Wes, well, thank you very much and for inviting me to speak at the launch event. And you know, Citizens Advice are involved a lot in pro bono, both in terms of hosting pro bono clinics, but also as advice providers ourselves. And we're the largest kind of national advice network, which gives us a kind of scale across the UK in terms of numbers of people helped and number of occasions across that we're able to support people from. So we provide we provide advice on all areas of law and social problems. And so just this last year, 2021, 2022, we saw over 40 million hits to our website for looking for online information. And in terms of our advice services, it's now more phone-based rather than help face-to-face. So we're seeing nearly 2 million people on the phones, but still a significant number of people face-to-face as well. But that proportion of like face-to-face advice, that dropped off significantly during the pandemic. So it used to be more like, more like sort of 750,000 who were held face-to-face pre-pandemic, and now that's obviously gone down. We're seeing more people by email and web chat, and the main advice issues that we're seeing are, as you'd expect, benefits, debt, housing, and consumer. But it's actually in the consumer area, and particularly energy, where demand has really, really risen over the past year, and I'll illustrate that in this presentation. So, what we're seeing is as prices rise, that people are just having to make decisions all the time about cutting back and getting what kind of and getting advice on how they do that and what kind of support they need. So, number of prepayment meters, that is going up quite significantly, and number of people who could be forced on prepayment meters by the end of this year, that again is really escalating. We're helping with crisis support. What do you mean by crisis support? That is people coming to us with emergency support, literally saying, we have no money, no food. And so to get referrals into food banks, get fuel vouchers, apply for charitable funding trust, charitable funding, or local authority welfare schemes. And we're seeing that kind of advice. We're seeing one person, so we're seeing 2 people every minute with that sort of advice. And that's more than 2019 and 2020 combined. It's continuing to rise month after month. So this is that sort of data in a graph. I can show you it in a bit more granular detail when I get onto a dashboard later. And we're also like the sort of national watchdog for energy consumers. So we kind of see and do the kind of data analysis on this nationally as well. And you may have seen some of the data from Cornwall Insights, that we're now looking at fuel poverty levels in this country reaching potentially sort of 40% of nearly 40% of households by April next year. British Retail Consortium have come up with recently with their what they are estimating as being the annual rate of inflation on food prices. That's 11%. And so according to the Food Foundation, 1 in 4 households now with children are experiencing food insecurity. And according to Shelter's most recent data on private renters, you've got 2.5 million renters now behind or struggling with their rent, and that's up 45% really since just this year, since April. That's from a YouGov survey they published a few weeks ago. So there's some really, really significant pressures across the UK, also across London, which is the kind of patch I look after, where 28% of people already live in poverty in London. That's up significantly. And again, fuel bills in London are going up quite significantly as well. So there's all that other data out there as well, which I think you need to kind of look in context at. We've done our own kind of research, and through, and we found, for example, in London, from our own research, of 20% of Londoners say now can't afford their energy bills. And they're cutting back on other essentials. And that things and that the energy rebate, it's welcome, but it's not significantly alleviating the problem. Is what the research is telling us. So people are still falling behind on energy bills and other costs. So the kind of increase we've seen is particularly around utilities, which we include energy in that, and the increased demand in that area of advice has just been going up and up, and other areas of localized welfare support, food bank referrals, benefit deductions, etc. All these areas are on the up in terms of demand and centralized services. And I'm going to share, to illustrate this all, a dashboard, which should come up. So we do this dashboard, which kind of represents this data, if you like, more in real time. And here's the guide for prepaid meter data.
Sorry, James, unless it's just me, we can still only see your PowerPoint rather than the dashboard.
Oh, right, okay. I may need to stop and share again. Okay, can you see the dashboard now?
Great, thanks, James.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a dashboard that's kind of tracked in real time, month to month, the demand into system device. So said prepaid meters, those issues have gone up and up. And from, say, a couple of years ago, and now look where it is now. So people reporting to us they can't afford to top up their prepaid meters. None people were helping with crisis support, and none people we're helping with energy issues. Again, this year, 2022, just up compared to last year, year before. Homelessness, that's up a bit on previous years, but then possibly was artificially down a bit in the, it was possibly the data was lower during the pandemic years because of the ban on eviction. So we saw less homeless issues during the pandemic period, but that is going up again now. So these kind of key cost of living areas, issues, again, they're all up this year. And also a significant increase in people and disabled people applying for personal independent payments. But so that's also up, and council tax arrears has been to come up again as well. And we can track who's sort of clicking onto what on our web pages. And again, it's very similar. It's help for energy bills, help cost of living, where do I get help, how much, etc., etc. That is all up. And people who've been coming to us for the first time, for like food banks support, charitable help, charity support, again, that is going up compared to last year. So that's good. I'll also share this dashboard in the chat so that you can look at the data for yourself. But on every single metric, we are seeing significant increases in all these cost of living issues, and how that plays around the country. So where I say in 2019, our biggest debt issues were like council tax arrears. Now it's energy debts are now our biggest debt issues. So we have these maps that, again, will show those differentials in local areas from year to year, which is a useful tool. And that's useful to share with local authorities as well. And sort of quantize the benefits. This, again, more and more people coming to us now with about person dependent payments, help with PIP, compared to 2 to 3 years ago, and that's an interesting statistic. And then housing, more people are actually coming about just accessing housing, and now I think it's quite interesting where this data, where the patterns of demand are showing on this, and again that's very useful data for local authorities. So non-people we help with crisis support per 10,000 of the population. Again, we've tracked that from area to area, and again, it's just all areas going up, but what you can see is, there is more demand in some areas than other areas, so that's interesting. And we do break down the data by demographics as well, and see who is it impacting the most. And often it's people, so disabled people with health conditions, and the ME communities are the people who these cost of living issues are impacting the most. And all of our data shows that. Again, cost of living issues, pre and post the crisis, all going up, and non-people in debt who have negative budgets, so budget deficits, and we can track that by demographic groups. So, for example, by ethnicity, again, it's affecting. So again, affecting more BAME community, and you can again see, small people in the private sector private rent sector who are in negative budgets, and so this is really sort of useful data as well. And the other groups that we're seeing particularly affected are actually more single people, or people and single people with children, in terms of household type. So but have a look at do have a look at this data in your own time, because there's a huge amount of it, and I can only give a sort of top level summary of it all. And non-people threatened homelessness has been going up a lot since the pandemic, as I say, but it was potentially low in the pandemic than it might otherwise have been due to the evictions ban. And energy debt collection, again, that's all up. And the amount of energy debt owed is up. So there's lots of really rich data here on all types of debts, particularly energy debt, but also other debts as well, and how those trends over time. And it's just really interesting to look at that sort of change over time, really.
Great, thank you very much, James. That's really instructive presentation you've given us on the cost of living data that Citizens Advice has been collecting. Thank you very much. I'm delighted now to hand over to the Attorney General, the Right Hon. Victoria Prentis MP. Welcome, Attorney.
Thank you. I think it's Toby. Thank you very much. And I'm very sorry to be joining rather late. Though I must say I'm not sorry to be joining after that excellent presentation, which, while not exactly a happy process, I mean, it was full of some fairly sobering statistics, I think does serve to remind us all why pro bono work is so important. And so I really want to start by thanking everybody for all the work that you do. And we know in government that pro bono is there to complement but not substitute for a properly functioning legal aid system. But what was also blindingly obvious from James's presentation is that there are people who do find it difficult to advocate for themselves, and it is important that we are there to provide a safety net for those people. So I really recognise the value of pro bono work. It definitely contributes towards access to justice and helps make a fairer society for all of us, and is genuinely in the public good. And it is also true, the solicitor and I were reflecting on our own early experiences of working for the Free Representation Unit today. It's also good for lawyers themselves. And I think we all recognise that. And however inadequate we feel as young lawyers, we are definitely helping people who can't speak for themselves find their voices. And both of us were full of those first early cases that we were involved with for the Free Representation Unit. So I hope that you're all looking forward to the events of this week and to hearing more about the benefits of pro bono work. And I know that the solicitor is very keen to get involved in Pro Bono Week as well, and is speaking at an event for junior lawyers tomorrow. We're both completely committed to championing this work. And I'd just like to end by thanking you for all you're doing. And I'm really sorry I couldn't be here at the beginning.
Thank you, Attorney, very much for those remarks. At your request, we're going to make sure there's a full report on today's discussion so that you have a written summary of all of the information.
Thank you.
We now move on to the next presentation. We now have Joanna Elson, as I've already introduced to you. She's the Chief Executive of Money Advice Trust. Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you very much, Toby. It's a real pleasure to be here today. And many of the things I will say kind of echo what James said. I will try not to repeat similar points, but you won't be surprised to hear that the story is similar, because people are really struggling at the moment. And you will all know from your pro bono work that households out there are finding some of the most difficult times I think some of us can remember. So let me just give you a little bit of a flavour of what we're seeing. So I run a charity called the Money Advice Trust, which is the one behind a couple of helplines, National Debt Line and Business Debt Line. We're also delighted to be able to train debt advisors across the UK, including some of the citizens' advice ones. And that's great for getting some real insight into what's happening out there, and that's what I want to share a bit of that with you today. So no surprise that the rising cost of living is dominating the agenda, and I think it's fair to say that households are facing a perfect storm, and you heard that I think from James. So the average energy bill is double what it was a year ago, even with the government's price guarantee. High inflation, and James talked about the BRC's I think it's 11.9 estimation of what that is for food and fuel. That means that more and more of people's income is taken up. And of course, the thing people really worry about on the phone lines and elsewhere is keeping a roof over their heads. So rising mortgage rates mean that the average homeowner coming off a fixed rate deal is going to have to find potentially hundreds of pounds extra a month to meet their new payments. And of course, renters are rightly concerned about the knock-on impact on rising rents. So average personal expenditure has risen by 7% in the last year. That's data we take from what we hear from callers. whilst income has risen by an average of 1%. And that just means that people can't make the sums add up. So I think James mentioned deficit budgets. 45% of our clients at National Debt Line now have a deficit budget. That means they simply haven't got enough coming into their home to cover the essential outgoings. And that's up from 37% last year. And for many of those households, of course, they were already having difficulties before the cost of living crisis, which crisis just makes things more unmanageable. And we're seeing that clearly in the types of debt people are coming to us about. The proportion of people contacting National Debt Line who have what we call priority debts, that's debts you really must pay first or something significant is going to happen. So energy arrears, council tax and rent, that's increased by 7 percentage points in the last year. And as one caller told us, rising costs means that I've had to cut back on absolutely everything that isn't essential. I don't go out anywhere anymore, don't socialise, don't use the car, only eat very cheap foods. Any more rises for anything will be disastrous. I cannot cut back on anything else. And we recently did a piece of research to understand this a little bit more. 1 in 5 UK adults say they're behind on at least one household bill, and many are already facing impossible choices when it comes to making ends meet. So we found that 5.6 million people had gone without food in the past 3 months as a result of the current crisis, and 5.9 million had gone without heating, electricity or water. Now, if you can move us on to the next slide, Toby, you'll see that the impact of this is not being, oh, sorry, I've skipped over one. Go back to the other one. Sorry, you were ahead of me. The impact is not felt equally. So, you know, and this is common, isn't it, in financial crisis? For people on lower incomes, people with a long-term health condition or a disability, and people from an ethnic minority background, all of those were more likely to have had a more severe impact from rising costs. So whilst 1 in 5 adults are behind on bills, that rises to 39% if you're from an ethnic minority background, to 40% if you're young, and to 45% for people receiving a means-tested benefit. Essentially, what we're seeing is that groups who are already more likely to be financially disadvantaged are feeling the worst impacts of the rising cost of living, and I think we all need to be alive to that. So if we can now move on to the next slide, Toby, it's fair to say, I think, that, you know, you look at rising mortgage rates, obviously not everybody is going to struggle with that. Some people will have enough wiggle room in their finances to absorb the extra costs. But for households whose expenditure already exceeds their income, those deficit budgets we talked about earlier, and those who were only just scraping by before, the situation is really concerning. Not having enough money to cover basic needs is consistently the most common reason why callers to our National Debt Line service have fallen into financial difficulty. So it's not surprising that our advisors are picking up on significant worries from callers to our service. Our advisors hear from people who are feeling really anxious, they're losing sleep, they're struggling to concentrate at work, all because they're worried about their finances. And when we talk to people across the UK population, we found 3 in 10 said they worry about money every day. 8 million people said they were regularly losing sleep because of their money worries, and 1/5 of all adults said the rising cost of living was having a negative impact on their health. Now, as part of our research, we asked people to tell us about the impact of the cost of living in a little bit more detail, and you can see on the slide here a little bit about how that has shifted over time. But I think if you look at that green line at the top, you know, that is perhaps the one that we should, if you take anything from what I've said, it's worth taking away with you, because above anything else and what our advisors hear when they talk to people on the phones, that's what they're hearing. People's income is too low for their basic needs. Now, of course, what we're able to do as a charity and working with other charities is to share this insight with people like you who are interested, with policymakers, with government, with regulators, and to come up with policy proposals. So I was fortunate enough to be at the Treasury Select Committee last week. The Treasury Select Committee are digging into what's the impact of the changes that the previous Chancellor's mini budget made on mortgages. And we were able to talk about things like, you know, the government has something called a scheme called Support for Mortgage Interest, which used to be a grant and is now a loan, but it is so restricted that you have to wait 9 months after you have applied before accessing any cash. And if you earn 1 penny when you have applied, then you have to go to the back of the queue and start again. So, you know, we're able to make some policy proposals for amending and improving some of the schemes that are out there, and very happy to talk to anybody about any of that. And of course, that was the one I mentioned was about mortgages, but there are many other areas where we need to see improvements. I think maybe the thing I'll leave you to take away, because I'm conscious that it's not a happy story that I'm telling you or James told you, and I was glad to hear the Attorney General recognise that you know, it's a difficult time for people, because I think sometimes if you're a minister or a senior policymaker, maybe a little bit isolated from these real-time effects that people are feeling. So I'm glad that she acknowledged that. The thing I would encourage you to take away is that the impact that we collectively can make on people's lives is a positive one. So I've told you some very difficult stories, and we hear those stories, our advisors hear those stories every day. But there are also some positive impacts when people are able to act on the advice they're given, and whether that's from us or from you, from your pro bono practice, we're able, aren't we, to change the course of people's lives. And we do have some lovely stories from people who say, you know, if it weren't for your advice, I don't know what would have happened, but I do now understand what I need to do to put my life back in order. And you will have many of those stories too. So I think that's probably enough from me. I've got lots more statistics, but it's more about, I think, us recognising together what it is we can do to help. I'm very happy to answer any questions when we get to that point. If there's time, Toby, thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Joanna. So we pass on now to Yasmin Waljee, who, as I mentioned, and get it right this time, is the International Pro Bono Partner. In fact, I think one of the first ever Pro Bono partners we had in the UK. And that was a great result back then. Of course, we celebrated our 20th anniversary of Pro Bono Week last year, and it was one of the topics I think was mentioned then. So there we go, over to you, Yasmin, and you're going to introduce John as a sort of double act in a moment.
I will do. Thank you very much, Toby, and to everyone. Good evening. It's so great to be with you on this online event. I love celebrating National Pro Bono Week. I only wish we could have done it in person, Toby. Perhaps next year the trains won't defeat us. As Toby said, I'm the partner that shapes the pro bono practice at Hogan Lovells. I say I don't lead it because I believe everyone in the firm has a leadership role within that practice. But I'm particularly proud of the work that we've done with John, who's online as we speak. In an international firm, we can sometimes become heavily involved in kind of the international scene. And over the last couple of years, we've helped with the evacuation of the Afghan women's national cycling team. We are working to protect the cultural heritage of Ukraine at the moment with the Odessa Fine Arts Museum. And our US colleagues have just secured one of the largest awards ever, Action on Racial Injustice for a wrongful imprisonment. But we can sometimes get swept along by the importance of the kind of geopolitical situation and the international human rights cases. And particularly for students on this call, it's really important that we recognise that there are human rights issues at the sense of ensuring individuals are able to realise their economic and social rights in this country. And that's equally as important. And I would just have a quiet aside, the Attorney General's no longer here, but I would say how important it is that we continue to support the Human Rights Act, not just because it supports our economic and social rights, but because they're universal and they're available to all of us, even for those of us that are unpopular at the moment. I actually wish within the Ministry of Justice there was more focus on the mundane areas of the justice system, rather than just trying to create a noise about the Human Rights Act. But we need to look at everything from the magistrates' courts, which are falling apart where the premises are finding it really difficult at the moment, through to having enough people at DWP to pick up the phone sometimes. So turning to the issue in hand, we've obviously heard about the stress people are finding themselves in. And we have worked on a benefit form filling service and appeals advice service for over 20 years now with John. But we realised at the time the fuel cap rise came in about March this year, that actually we needed a more in-depth approach, a more focused approach. And so working with John, who has the most encyclopedic knowledge of the benefit system, which is really useful for us, we have part funded a cost of living clinic at St Luke's in Islington and the Westway Trust in North Kensington. What we do is we provide 2 to 3 volunteers a week. We can scale up, and are scaling up. We have 75 volunteers available, and everyone at Hogan Lovells is committed to doing at least 25 pro bono hours in a year, but often we can do more than that. And we tend to find that people really enjoy getting involved once they put their minds to it and want to really engage with the issues, because actually you see the impact of the work. And when Joanna was talking about the positive side of this, there is a positive side in that it really helps people feel connected to societies, and it's an issue which is important to them and their families. The other great thing about working with John is this program is not exclusively for lawyers. We can train up our business professional colleagues as well. And it really gives us a purpose for which we get involved in pro bono work for. The other interesting thing that's happened recently is, once we've got a bit of media profile on the cost of living clinic, we've actually seen our corporate in-house legal teams want to come forward and partner with us on it, which has been a really positive sign, because I think it affects everyone across the board. So for us, it's an initial in-depth interview of the individual's position, and there's a real needs analysis which John helps us conduct, and our volunteers support that process. I'll give one example that John has brought to us and where we were involved, but I'm sure he'll talk to us about other examples. I mean, one particular one that struck home with me was a 90-year-old who was originally an evacuee to the West Country, working in agriculture, and through hard work had never actually learnt to read or write. He was living with his 60-year-old son, but COVID unfortunately had affected the situation of the individuals, and their savings had slowly been eaten up, and they were facing huge credit card bills. But what was interesting and what struck me is, when John told us about this particular case, the job centre had failed to see that this particular household was entitled to housing benefit, council tax reduction, pension credit, a reduction in their Thames water bill, a free TV licence, and a taxi card. They hadn't spotted any of that. There was also other energy financial relief that was possible. And we know, as we've heard, that so many people don't actually claim what they're entitled to. We only just last week, I think it was in the press, that there were 25 million energy support vouchers for people on prepayment meters that hadn't been claimed, and they're only available for 90 days. I've recently learned there's a broadband concession, which I hadn't heard of before. But John will go into it about how we're really seeing that digital divide having an impact. And I'll just sort of end by saying that the Financial Times obviously covered the welfare benefit, the cost of living clinic that we were having. And one of our volunteers had to make 3 phone calls on behalf of a mother and family, and spent over 2 hours waiting for DWP. And actually at the end of that, just secured £32.30, which actually should have been payable in any event on universal credit. So it is extraordinary just how difficult it is, and it really brings home and is a real grounding for people who get involved in this work, but there's a real positive impact that comes from it. So I'll hand over to the encyclopedic knowledge that is John. John, would you like to give us an insight from your point of view? You're on mute.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Well, you've had lots of statistics, and my statistics will concur with those of James and Joanna. Interestingly, if you are looking to do pro bono work, start up a pro bono scheme, we find that between 40 and 50% of our clients are illiterate, either illiterate or digitally illiterate. And as the government runs a scheme which is digital by default, which means that most applications for benefits or for housing or homelessness are made via using a PC or a laptop, you need both literacy and digital literacy. So if you're thinking of starting up a pro bono scheme or joining one, the fact that you are trained as a lawyer or you work in a law firm as one of the support staff is you have the skills which are necessary to help somebody already. We find that with clients who've got a lack of money, we provide benefit checks for them. And in order to learn how to provide a benefit check, you can teach yourself. This information is available online. Turn to us, an excellent website. It takes you about 15-20 minutes to learn how to do a benefit check. I'm at our cost of living crisis clinic. I'm there to hold the hand of all lawyers and non-lawyers. So if anybody needs any help or any support, I'm always there, for them to come over, ask a quick question, and then go back to their client. We've also trained Hogan Lovells lawyers to represent clients at tribunals. So we have a very high success rate traditionally of overturning decisions. In fact, it was at 95% for most of the years. And with housing, we assist people to make housing applications and homelessness applications. And again, if you can't use a computer and you're being threatened with homelessness, if you don't come to one of these clinics, and if lawyers don't stand forward and offer pro bono advice, there really isn't anywhere else to go. You can't go to a library. There isn't enough time for librarians to sit there and help you make these types of applications. Grants, we assist people to make grants to charities such as the Family Fund and the Buttle Trust, so that children can make applications for things like iPads, and parents can get help with the cost of school uniforms. And Westway Trust itself, we have our own crisis grants. So if people come to us in an emergency and there's nothing that we can help them with on a statutory basis, we'll assist them with an emergency grant. Social tariffs, as Yasmin mentioned, we assist people to make applications to the much hidden Thames Water social tariff. Most clients have never heard of this. It's a tariff which allows you a 50% discount off your bill if the household has an income in London of under £20,100. And we're now approaching some barristers to find out if we can actually challenge the decision that Thames Water has made not to publicise their social tariff, which we think is a bit naughty. In North Kensington, where we're based, what we decided to do was print thousands of flyers explaining the Thames Water tariff. We didn't actually put our name or address on them, and just giving the details of Thames Water. So we're assuming lots of people in the area of North Kensington now have benefited from that social tariff. We also work alongside food banks. So where we work at the St. Luke's Centre in Islington, we've chosen to work on the day that their food bank operates, so that clients who come to us who've got no money, we can assist them with obtaining funds or grants, and we can take them around to the food bank afterwards, and they can fill up with a bag full of goodies to take home. We work alongside our sister agency in Kensington and Chelsea that helps unemployed people to gain confidence and join the workplace by providing them with work-paid placements. So as well as helping people to get benefits and grants, we're also helping people on the first steps of the employment ladder. We're quite proud of the fact that next week, or next Monday, we have 8 lawyers from an international bank, which is a client of Hogan Lovells, and we will be descending on the Theatre Royal in Sloane Square, where we will be helping for one morning only refugees from Ukraine to make claims for benefits, grants, housing, etc. We'll also be helping them to find schools for kids, GP surgeries for them to register with. And, that's quite an innovation to have a pop-up legal clinic. We hope it works. And if it does, in 4 months' time, we'll be back with the lawyers from Hogan Lovells, back with the lawyers from the International Bank, and doing it all again. We're going to ask the lawyers to bring down one present, because lots of the kids have had to flee Ukraine. They haven't got their toys with them. Christmas is coming up. And so we're going to say, look, either bring a present or do something on Amazon and just make sure it arrives at the Ukrainian centre before Christmas. So that's a lovely touch. And of course, we train our volunteers to help clients to beat down the cost of living with tips. So we're trying to teach the kids at the moment to switch off the tap when they're brushing their teeth. And, you know, we're producing a little booklet that parents can take home, trying to make it fun so that families can reduce the cost of their utilities. So there we go. They're the things that we do in order to keep it an exciting environment for lawyers and non-lawyers to volunteer at our cost of living crisis clinic. And it's, you know, not just as an agency, it's not doing the linear stuff of just filling in forms. We're looking at campaign work. We're looking at helping people change their tariffs. We're trying to be really broad-minded in what we deliver.
It's a brilliant service, and I'm really grateful to John and everyone at Westway and St Luke's. You know, there is the potential to do so much more if we had the funding, and that at the end of the day is what everyone needs in order to stretch our services further. But it's a good investment. Thanks, Toby.
Pleasure.
Great, thank you very much, Yasmin and John. So we have a few questions for the panel, and I'm going to try to pose one question to each of you. We've got 10 minutes remaining. Shall we start with this one, which really relates to just what we've been hearing, actually, about how lawyers can respond. I mean, we've obviously heard about how some of Hogan Lovells' colleagues are able to work in partnership with John and his charity colleagues, as well as colleagues in banks. But Yasmin and John, how do you actually train them up? Because we've heard John say that you can actually perhaps have a 10-minute sort of bit of research on Google to work out how to help someone. But isn't it quite difficult for some lawyers to actually start helping on cost of living issues?
For us, it is really fantastic to have John available to train us on a regular basis. And actually, you can develop an in-house specialization. Once you have a few lead partners who are going to take this on board, they will then keep themselves up to date in any way as a secondary specialization, and you start to actually disseminate the information without the need to rely on John and the advice agency to support you. So that's one way of doing it. I know that there are other LawWorks, I'm sure has the ability to provide training on various different benefits, whether we're talking about PIP or DLA. John, perhaps you've got other ideas on how people can train themselves as well.
Okay, well, what we generally do is we do a shadowing. We produce a manual, which Hogan Lovells has, and training video, which is only an hour long. And also I pop down once a year, maybe twice a year, and deliver a 1 hour lunchtime training session. We try and get the new intake of lawyers who start in September. So we catch them just as they're fresh into the law firm and explain to them the importance of doing pro bono. So in essence, what training do you need? You can start off easy. Just start off specialising with a couple of forms, as Yasmin said, disability living allowance for children, personal independence payment for adults. And then if you want to do end-to-end casework, which some firms are quite interested in, not only do you assist that person to complete the form, but if they're unsuccessful, you go on to shadow somebody who does an appeal before a judge and represent your appellant before a judge at their hearing.
The message really then is to make sure, if you're a law firm, to partner with one of your local advice agencies who've got that expertise that can help support, train and supervise your lawyers. Is that how we'd sum it up in a sentence?
Absolutely. And if anyone has a particular interest, they're very welcome to get in touch with me to talk about what the possibilities are.
Great, thanks, Yasmin. I mean, speaking for myself, secondary specialisation is something we've talked about in previous pro bono weeks. And as you mentioned, LawWorks has a secondary specialisation project, which is worth checking out. And myself, I conducted, or rather took part in secondary specialisation training recently, which DARA, the Domestic Abuse Response Alliance, is organising, allowing commercial barristers to be trained up to help with non-molestation injunction applications for victims of domestic violence. And so I attended a training session recently at Travers Smith, which was really interesting for me to go through that process. So that's a personal anecdote from me, but let's move on to the next question, which is one that's being posed, I think, both to you, James, and to Joanna. We've obviously heard about the challenges that the clients are facing, but how many of those clients are in work? How many of those are unemployed currently?
I mean, I don't have the full data for that. I can get it, but it just takes a bit of extraction. But yeah, as we know, in terms of people in poverty, the majority of people in poverty are in work poverty. And yeah, so we have 22 of the population, I think it's 22% of the population are in work poverty. I mean, in terms of like sort of debt clients and others who are how much portion of in work who come to citizens advice. I mean, I think in terms of our debt clients, I think it's sort of over 50%, but I think quite a significant proportion now are in sort of low paid part-time work, 0 hours contracts, and it's that kind of work that is so unreliable as income that people get into debt.
Yeah, I'd echo that, James. I think what this is the kind of dispiriting thing for people about the cost of living crisis is that they just, they feel like they've got on top of stuff and they've worked really hard to get where they need to be, and then the prices go up again. So then they're looking for a further part-time job or more hours or whatever it is, and that just leaves people feeling that it's kind of impossible to get on top of. So I think that is difficult. The other thing I would highlight is that because we run a business debt line too, which is mainly for tiny businesses, self-employed people and tiny businesses, and I think sometimes we think of businesses as being in a particular category, but of course the vast majority of businesses in this country are small businesses, and they are the same people as the people who come to Citizens Advice or elsewhere with their problems, because they're not only coping with what we've talked about in terms of price rises around their home, but they're also coping with whatever their business is. They've had a pretty tough time recently with the pandemic and price rises and so on and so on. So I think we've got record employment, haven't we, in this country at the moment. It isn't that people aren't working, although there are some people who can't work. It is that it's very difficult to make work pay enough if you're in a very large number of low-paid working environments.
Thanks, Joanna. I think both your responses really highlight the challenge that the public really are facing now, that you're in debt and in work and facing increasing costs, both fuel, food, and all your other expenses. So going back then to law firm Pro Bono, we've got just a few minutes left. We have had a question from Monideepa, who you probably know is the reporter at the Law Society Gazette. This is a question for you, I think, really, Yasmin, but others are welcome to comment. Should larger firms be required to allocate a certain number of billable hours to pro bono contributions that are taken into account as part of overall bonus assessments? Some firms are doing so in relation to diversity, equity, and inclusion contributions.
Yes, I can see that. I think it has to be for each firm to make its own decision as to where it wants to put its emphasis. As a firm, we have a billable hour credit for pro bono work, and it is important to us. As joining Hogan Lovells, you know that it is part of our professional obligations to become involved in pro bono. I would leave it to others to decide whether or not it should be a mandatory obligation, but I feel that it gives real purpose. It's something that members of the firm who join us really want to see their law firms doing, is providing the platform for them to be able to get involved in pro bono, which necessarily means that it has to be recognized. So I actually think it's a market leading edge that we have for those people who want to have that commitment to wider society as well as to their professional commercial careers. I don't know if anyone else has any views.
Well, I have another question which we can use the remaining time on. Thanks, Yasmin. John, we've obviously been focusing on the cost of living crisis. We've heard about the clinic that Hogan Lovells established in conjunction with yourself. But if lawyers are thinking about trying to volunteer at a cost of living clinic, does it matter that it's titled like that? In fact, is any advice clinic going to be helping on cost of living? Put it a different way, what's the difference between a cost of living clinic and an advice clinic?
Okay, so advice clinics generally follow a funding stream, and as we're working with an international law firm, we don't have any barriers as to the type of area that we can help with. So if we see a new need emerge, we're very agile. We can move into that immediately. And for example, the fact that we're doing a pop-up with the Ukrainian refugees at a theatre next week, and we've arranged that within 2 weeks with an international bank, an international law firm, and we're looking at another bank joining us later on. It does allow us to be quite agile. The fact that we do campaign work, the pop-ups that we do, the fact that we're able to train lawyers to do end-to-end work so that they can help people not just with a claim, but also help them later on with an appeal. And the fact that we can help people make applications for grants from our trust and also from other trusts as well. So it's no one thing, but put together in a sum from just one clinic, it is pretty much larger than any other advice clinic that I've worked in.
Great, thanks, John. I think we've got time for one final question, since we didn't start until little past 6:30. And this may be a question that is, again, both for Joanna and James, but I'll ask Joanna to address it first. We heard the presentations showing a really stark picture in terms of the statistics, but are those stats actually accurate? Are they just reflecting the demand that you see through the doors of your services, or the people who click on your websites? Is in fact the problems that the public are facing actually even greater?
Well, perhaps I should have made it clearer that I was talking about two things really. So I was talking about the clients that contact us at National Debtline and Business Debtline, but we also did a survey in the summer, and the report's on our website. It's called Impossible Choices, and that was of 2,000 representative adults from right across the UK, from the usual groupings to make sure the demographics are representative. So I think that shows us, and I think if you look at any of the other research out there, whether it's the Resolution Foundation, whether it's the ONS statistics I was looking at earlier today, whether it's Citizens Advice or whatever it is, we're hearing very similar pictures. You could argue about the statistics, but the picture is very similar, I think. One thing that I didn't say that maybe I could just add, we talked about how there is some, I want to end this on something positive. There is some positive out there, and I think one of the things there, and Yasmin talked about this really, is that for the people who John and James and we and others serve, they need to know that they're not on their own. And I think this is one of the things that the help that we all provide can do. And I've got a quote here a short quote from one of our clients, a woman called Maria, who said, "Your help allowed me to see that what happened to me happens to others, and it's possible to get through it. You helped me understand the priorities and what needed doing, one step at a time." And I think that's the quote I'd like to end on, because it is that about people not feeling that the world is completely against them. They understand that other people are in the same situation, and with our help, all of us, they understand how it is that they can move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanna, for that positive note. James, you have a final minute to answer that question, and then I'm going to wrap up. Thank you very much.
Well, yes, Toby, you're absolutely right. And I think when organisations like Citizens Advice and others say, we've seen X percent more clients this year than last year, you're not talking, and sometimes that gets kind of misrepresented as being an increase in demand. It actually isn't. It's an increase. It's a measure of supply, not a measure of demand. It's what you're able to capture, what you're able to count, what you're able to see through your systems and collect through management information. So what you're actually seeing is literally the tip of the iceberg. But as Joanna says, we also do research using polling companies as well to get to wider understanding of people's problems and the wider numbers out there. But definitely you're right on that. And just to say, in terms of how lawyers can partner with advice agencies. And I'm doing a session tomorrow at 4:15. It's in the National Pro Bono Week calendar about how lawyers can work with citizens' advice. Because it's also our national conference this week. So it's one of the things that we're discussing.
Great, thank you very much, James. I'm just going to shall I put in the chat the details of that event?
Yes, please, thanks, I can't.
So thank you very much, everyone. We've just now gone to exactly an hour since we started. If I could wrap up in this way, it's obviously been stark to hear about the demand or the supply, depending on how you define it, that we're seeing on the front line, that the public are facing with this cost of living crisis. But we've also heard that we as a legal profession, working in conjunction with the charity sector, can help. It's not doom and gloom as much. Well, it will be doom and gloom if we don't help. It's not as bad if we can do something. And as lawyers, we have a gift that we can offer to those who don't have a legal education, or indeed, as John said, who don't necessarily have literary skills or even IT skills, to fill out forms to help them get benefits or to obtain relief from their broadband rates or their water rates. And so there is a positive message here that we've ended on, that we can volunteer. There are lots of ways to do it. If you go to the Pro Bono Week website, for example, and click on volunteering, there are various options there. You can obviously volunteer through your law firm if you're a lawyer. LawWorks is a member organisation you can join too. There's the UK Collaborative Plan that law firms can join too. There are lots of ways that you can volunteer. You can volunteer at a local advice agency as an individual. If you're a barrister, you can volunteer through Advocate. There is every possible way that we can volunteer as lawyers. And in fact, if we look at the stats, it's a huge amount the profession is providing to the public, and hopefully it will increase. Today, law.com published the results of their survey, showing that over the last year, the top 40 law firms combined carried out 454,000 hours of pro bono work. And if we look at the UK Collaborative Plan stats, also published today, their member firms offered 516,000 hours of pro bono help in the last year. So there is, albeit a great supply of pro bono, it's not enough to meet the demand, but there still is a lot that we can do together. So with that, I hope a bit of a rallying cry. Can I thank our panelists as well as the Attorney General for their really interesting and provoking contributions tonight. And can I encourage you all to get involved in other events this week in Pro Bono Week. Thank you very much to you all.